Hello, students. Today I want to talk to you about punctuation, but also sentence types. So everything that we've practiced up till now is going to be put into effect, and you're going to apply the things that you've been practicing. So you'll notice that the title of this particular paper is Punctuation Pattern Sheet, okay? So if you'll see that, that's true. In order to know how to punctuate, you have to know and understand phrases and clauses. So there's a reason it's called punctuation pattern sheet, even though I use this to teach sentence structure as well. So here's what I'd like to walk you through. We're going to look at this first type of sentence, okay? And if you'll notice, it says independent clause, okay? This particular type of sentence is just a simple sentence. So hopefully you can see my notes here to the side, which means that you're going to have one subject-verb combination, okay? And it's going to, in order to use a period, of course, it's going to need to be a complete thought. So one independent clause, it can stand on its own. And this, of course, is separated usually by periods. Now, if you use too many of these, it gets very redundant, and in fact, your writing starts to sound very elementary, okay? So what we want to talk about and learn how to do is use punctuation and our understanding of clauses to build different kinds of sentences, okay? So let's take a look at this next kind of sentence. This particular kind of sentence is called a compound sentence. And you'll notice that it contains, because I've used a semicolon here, okay, it contains two subject-verb combinations, okay? And a semicolon is one way to join two independent clauses. Now, if you do that, notice some things happen in terms of your punctuation and your capitalization, okay? So, for example, if I said, she studied very hard for the test. And I want to connect it to a sentence that says, she got a great score. The reason a semicolon works there is because those two sentences are related, okay? It's just one more option. And notice when I use a semicolon that I do not capitalize the first letter of the next sentence, unless it would be I or something like that, or a name, of course. So that is one way to create a compound sentence. I have two, okay, if I look at the sentence, she studied, right, and she got. I have two independent clauses being joined by a semicolon, okay? This is also a compound sentence, this one here. And these particular conjunctions are called coordinating conjunctions. So make sure that you're writing all this down, okay, on your paper. So if I want to create another kind of compound sentence, let's say I don't want to use a semicolon, I can do it this way. I just need a subject verb on this side and a subject verb on this side. That could potentially be separated, right? But instead, I'm going to use one of these conjunctions. Now, some people remember these conjunctions by remembering the acronym FANBOYS. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So it's an easy way to talk about coordinating conjunctions. You can just say, well, I could put a fanboy there, okay? So for example, if I took the same sentence I created before, I could say, she studied very hard for the test, so she got a great score. Haven't said anything new, it just gives me one more option for how to join my two clauses. Here's the rule. If it's an independent clause to the left and an independent clause to the right, it's not a choice. You must have a comma with that coordinating conjunction, okay? So if I wrote it this way, notice what happens to my punctuation. She studied hard for the test and got a great score. The reason I do not put a comma here, guys, is because there's no subject on this other side. I'm just joining two verbs, right? She studied and got. So I lose the comma because technically got a great score cannot stand on its own, right? That has to be joined to an independent clause. Okay? All right, so let's keep going. See if I can move my document down here. Whoops. All right, we have one more type of compound sentence that we're going to look at today. So this is also a compound sentence. One more option, okay? Now these particular conjunctions right here look fancy, okay, but they really do nothing more than what those coordinating conjunctions were doing before. These are called conjunctive adverbs. They have to be punctuated this way: semicolon, conjunction, comma, if what's on either side is actually an independent clause. Remember, it can stand on its own. So I could say, she studied hard for the test. Consequently, she got a great score. One more option, okay? It looks fancy, right? It looks like a fancy way to join sentences. And in fact, you most often see this kind in more formal writing because it just looks more formal. But it's an easy way to elevate your writing. This is an easy sentence to emulate, okay? Now, that's different than, you have to be careful with these sometimes. Sometimes they just interrupt. So let me show you how that might look. Particularly the word however sometimes will trump students. So we could say she did not study hard for the test. However, she still got a great score. Okay? Now, notice that's still two independent clauses on either side. But look what happens if I make that what's called an interrupter. She did not, however, study for the test. Okay? Look to the right of the word however. Study for the test. Can't stand on its own. So this is how come I don't put a semicolon here. Okay? So the word however can sometimes be a bit tricky. All of these can be. You have to really look to determine, do I really need a semicolon? Is what I'm conjoining independent on both sides. Okay? All right, so those are called conjunctive adverbs, and this creates a second type, or third type, excuse me, of a compound sentence. Okay, this is our last type, and I'll go over all of this again in class, but this is a good introduction, okay? All right, this type of sentence is called a complex sentence. Okay? Notice that it is the only type of sentence that contains one, okay, let's see if I can slide that over a bit, contains one dependent clause and one independent clause. Okay, we talked a little bit about this the other day. All right, so for example, let's look at the first way I can create a complex sentence. If I start with one of these conjunctions, now these are those subordinate conjunctions I told you about. Okay, sometimes they're called subordinate conjunctions because when you stick one of these onto an independent clause, it stops being independent. It has to be connected then to something else. It creates a dependent clause or a subordinate clause. Okay, so for example, let's create a couple of these. I could say, although she studied hard for the test, comma, so I'm going to imitate this first structure right here, she did not do well. Okay? Notice that if you put your finger over the word although, you can see the two independent clauses in there. Okay? She studied and she did do. That's my two subjects and verbs. Once I stick that although on there, this becomes dependent, okay? Now notice what happens to my punctuation when I write it according to the second model, okay? She did not do well on the test, although she studied hard. Notice that I lose the comma. Okay, when I move that subordinate conjunction to the middle, you lose the comma. This is why there is not a comma before the word because. That's a very common punctuation error. Okay, So this creates what's called a complex sentence. Now we're going to stop there, and I'll talk about these other things on the bottom of your paper later. But here's what I would like for you to do. You have an activity that is asking you to combine sentences in a variety of ways. At the top of that paper, I don't have this scanned in, so I'm sorry, but you should be looking at it. It's that grammar exercise. At the top of the paper, you have some model sentences, but I want you to just practice combining simple sentences by using any or all of these techniques, okay? The beautiful thing about learning how to do this is writing and punctuation just stops being a guessing game. It's just a matter of building different types of sentences. And this is what writers do. They pay a lot of attention to the kinds of sentences that they're creating, and they don't want to have the same sentence pattern over and over and over. That becomes very monotonous. So good writers are definitely paying attention to these structures. And really, if you can master just this handful of information, your writing will advance and be much more elevated than it ever has been before. And it won't be a guessing game where commas go, where a semicolon goes. There are a couple of rules for semicolons, but as you can see, one of them is separating independent clauses, okay, whether here or here. All right, so I hope this lesson was clear for you, and I'd like for you to go ahead and put this into practice with that grammar exercise where it's asking you to combine sentences in a variety of ways, okay? So go ahead and complete that. We will go back over this again. Make sure that you bring questions with you next class, okay? Thanks, guys. Have a good rest of your class.